Hello, all, and welcome back to Aware AI Brief. This is our monthly series diving into different AI governance topics, discussions, comments, questions, whatnot. And as always, I'm joined here by Walter Haydock of StackAware. Walter, how are we doing today?
Hey, Cameron. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good to see you as well. I tried to get some lighting deficiencies corrected here. So I apologize if it's coming across gloomy, but that's what it's like outside here today. So it's fitting here. So I wanted to go over the questions and comments that came in, or that were at least adjacent to some of the things we've been discussing, some of the AI governance topics, and kind of get your take on it, discuss it. As we've mentioned and opened almost every time here, this is a opportunity for your questions. It's built on your questions. It's built on your comments on YouTube videos, on LinkedIn posts, things such as that, of that nature. So if you have questions, this is a great place to present those, to bring those to our attention, as I mentioned, on YouTube or LinkedIn. And feel free to send a DM or a message as well. If you don't, unless you specifically state you want credit for it, I'm not going to say who it's from. So it's the anonymity is pretty nice as well. So feel free to ask the questions, and greatly appreciate those of you that have. So some of the submissions from this past month. We'll start with a couple questions and get into some other topics as well. The first question that was raised was, how does the reason an organization adopts a particular AI tool or system influence the way that tool or system should be governed?
The underlying business purpose for a given tool is absolutely critical to determining the governance structure that you apply to it. So, if you look at something like ISO 42001, that requires when you're performing risk assessments, an analysis of the internal and external issues applicable to the organization. That could be things like business priorities, it could be your regulatory landscape, it could be competitive dynamics. And all of these things are key to driving how you make decisions about artificial intelligence systems. I'll give you an example. If the purpose of using ChatGPT is to generate marketing content, then your regulatory requirements are going to be pretty light. You may have some demands in terms of deep fakes or notifying people that you're using artificial intelligence to create the assets. But aside from that, it's going to be pretty light. If you're using ChatGPT to analyze candidate resumes for employment, then you're going to trip all sorts of different regulatory requirements: New York City Local Law 144, the EU AI Act, Colorado SB 1889. A whole slew of things are going to be triggered in that case. So, the underlying reason for introducing an AI tool to your environment is a core consideration when determining how to govern it.
Yeah, yeah. So in a nutshell, how does that reason affect it? Greatly, right? Like, it's very much, to your point, the underlying point of it. And I think even too, additional to that is obviously what tiers of a product you might use, right? So you understand that we all would know that that applies to a lot of times how large our organization is, or the use, but that use is a through line for all the way from purchasing through the governance process. So,
Yep, you definitely need to keep the business reason for the tool's existence in mind throughout.
yeah,
And like I said, if you're using ChatGPT to screen resumes, then you need to do things like post a bias audit under
mm,
New York City Local Law 144. You need to have redress procedures under SB 189. So the governance requirements really expand greatly
sure,
depending on the use case.
sure, that's good. The next question we had was, how do you determine where human in the loop sits in an organization, maybe in addition to top management direction or priorities? Like, how do you know say you're looking to implement it, how do you know where the spots are that might be necessary?
Having a human in the loop at some point is critical for any AI system, but exactly where in the loop and what sort of actions that human is taking is dependent on the use case. So the way I like to break it down is three different methods of having human in the loop. One would be default deny, which would be in a high stakes but non time sensitive scenario. That would be where you'd want to deploy default deny. So if you're releasing highly sensitive information, if you're making an irreversible decision that is not time sensitive, then default deny would be the way to go. And basically, nothing happens unless a human approves the decision, signs on the dotted line, what have you. The next level down would be default allow with a delay. And this, you might actually want this method of human in the loop for irreversible situations, but where there's time sensitivity and where there's demonstrated benefit for having the AI make decisions without a human. Perfect example here would be autonomous vehicles. If a car is careening down the highway and the AI detects before a human does that a crash is going to happen, then it might make sense for the car maybe to give a quick warning saying like, hey, we're about to slam on the brakes unless you override. But hey, we're not going to wait if you're on your phone or asleep or whatever. We're not going to wait until you approve, for this to happen. And it's interesting because just today I got somebody was criticizing me on a LinkedIn post about the second mode, saying that if you have a fatigued human and you have default allow with a delay, then that's just kind of a rubber stamp, and that doesn't meet the EU AI Act oversight requirements. I said, well, autonomous vehicle where there's a driver who's fatigued is like the perfect use case for where you would want the system to proceed, giving a warning perhaps to the operator, but still nonetheless not waiting until the human affirmatively decides. So that's the second case or second method of human in the loop. And then the third would be a post hoc review. So after the system has made decisions, then you can track it on a monthly, quarterly, what have you basis. This is good for very low stakes, maybe time sensitive decisions, but lower stakes decisions. So routing network traffic is a low stakes decision, but it's time sensitive. If a packet needs to decide whether to zig or zag, then you can't wait for a human to say you should zig instead of zagging. But it's low stakes. So if you make the wrong decision, maybe one pixel in a video feed is going to be delayed and a little blurry. So it's not that big a deal. So that's where post hoc review and an analysis of the performance of the system over time makes sense. So the level at which you're going to designate accountability for making that review will depend again on the sensitivity. If you're talking about how well an investment algorithm is performing, and maybe that's like a board level review. If it's a financial services company, like maybe the board needs to sign off on the parameters, needs to sign off on the retraining, but it still could be post hoc review because yes, it's bad if you lose money, but like money can be remade, and there are other things that the business needs to do. And then on the opposite end, if you're talking about a drone strike or something like that, maybe you want to have somebody who's on the ground, an operator who has full context of the situation, and is feeling that time pressure. That person might be justified in making the call rather than going all the way up to like a general officer level to make a decision when there's huge time sensitivity there. So there are a variety of different factors at play, and those are the three levels and where I think you should assign accountability for human in the loop.
Yeah. I think that gives good guidance as far as within, to whomever might be asking this question, or for those that might be listening, like to try to pinpoint that for yourselves, for your specific instance. Those guidelines will help kind of steer you in that right spot. So yeah, that's good. I like that. The next question was, has anything about how AI systems or agents work, we'll say in the wild, change or adjusted your approach to governance and security methods, control steps? So I think kind of asking, what have you seen? How has your approach or vantage point determined how you think about AI governance now versus maybe pre-agent, pre some of the newness of technological development?
Things are changing very rapidly when it comes to AI governance and security, and even relatively big things. For example, like Anthropic changed its policies on training by default on user content for some of its free Claude offerings. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was a pretty substantial change that they made recently that, we actually at Stackware just updated our database to track that. But that's the type of thing now that we need to monitor those types of changes autonomously using AI to stay up to date. So
Yeah.
we've refined our analysis of policy changes to that itself be a more autonomous process. Additionally, with agentic AI, the ability to connect to different data sources makes agentic systems very powerful. It also makes them potentially dangerous. And you can have a user who's authorized to see multiple different data types, who is authorized to use a given system, who might even be trained in using that system. But if you allow an agent to connect to a variety of different data sources, it could do things, it could behave in ways that were not anticipated or intended. And then also it could start tripping regulatory tripwires along the way based on the functionality that's being designed. And an individual citizen developer could be implementing these changes in a way that's not necessarily getting centralized governance review. So continuous monitoring of these assets that are deployed, the data sources they can access, what they're being used to do, I think is really key. And that's something that has sped up in terms of how quickly you need to do it over just the past year.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking even as you were talking about what you said to one of the previous questions about human in the loop, right? Like determining where that lies has probably changed. I know in my own assumptions or thoughts going into AI governance was, a human should be reviewing everything, and that how quickly that went out the window just because you can't.
Yeah.
And so making those adjustments in that case, and it's good. It's good to sometimes stop and think about like, hey, where have we changed our mentality? I'm of the opinion that if you never change the way you think, then you're just looking to be proven right? You just like kind of old man yelling at the clouds. So this is changing so fast that we have to kind of make at least adjustments, albeit not wholesale changes to the way we look at or approach AI governance, but being willing to be flexible in how we're looking at it and how we process it, basically.
So on that note, I'll say that an interesting distinction between artificial intelligence and human intelligence is that the training and inference processes are necessarily separate for artificial intelligence. You do a training run, and then you can run the model at inference time. And I'm sure in the future we'll have models that are both training as they're inferencing, which will be impressive and scary at the same time. But humans, while they're processing, are also learning at the same time. That both things happen at once. They actually have to happen at the same time. You can't just sit there and magically get smarter by doing nothing.
Right.
Although I'll say, especially, and now that I'm 40, I feel like I can say this, without triggering any sort of backlash. But men at a certain age, they kind of become impervious to new training, and like they're just inferencing. It's only inference. Yeah. They're just processing based on the previous training. Like once they hit a certain age.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, the facts may have shifted in the past 10 to 20 years. Like you shouldn't just be running the same. You should upgrade the model, and
Yeah.
But I think certain old men just kind of don't do that. They just they become impervious to new input to their model.
I'm not there yet, but I'm hearing you say it starts at 40. but we'll so,
Well,
so I'll look
according
forward to that.
to, yeah, technically, according to, I think it's like the Equal Opportunity Commission, it's like there's a presumption that I forget the exact rule, but like once you hit 40, you have certain protections against age
Sure,
discrimination.
sure.
Yeah, that you don't if you're below 40. And
Okay,
there, I think there is evidence that even cognitive decline starts. Well, it could start even earlier, but it starts
sure,
becoming noticeable at that point. So,
sure.
I better
I
better
I get
hurry
it
up.
though. You were talking more
Yeah,
about the liability part of it than the
yeah,
actual
yeah. I was talking about the
cognitive part of it.
liability.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. You do happen to, as you get older, you do know more. So, a lot
Right.
of people can make up for the decline in inferencing power and training
Yeah.
power by just raw amount of knowledge.
Sure.
So that can
Sure.
certainly be helpful.
Training data. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, we'll move on to the a couple questions here, and then a few other topics as well. But the next question was, where, if any, is AI governance mostly theater right now, in your opinion?
AI governance is mostly theater in a lot of policies and procedures that I read. I mean, GRC teams spend a lot of time writing documents that are just documents. They're just Word or Google Docs that sit on a SharePoint and they look nice and they sound nice and they may check the box from a compliance perspective, but there's no there's no API call that's bouncing against them saying, yes, we've done this or no, we haven't done this. And I think that creates some theater. Whenever you see requirements hard coded into policies, especially like with respect to certain laws, that I've seen policies refer to certain laws that have changed in the interim. That for example,
Mm-hmm.
Colorado SB 189 just changed, so all the old policies that were referring to that will be outdated. And if you just have a document that is hard coded and static and is not dynamically updated, you're not continuously checking against new best practices, rules, regulations, things like that, then you are going to be to a degree performing some theater. If you have the policy, you might check the box, you might meet the requirement, but you're not actually managing the risk. And in some cases, you can create risk if a regulator comes in and says, "Hey, you're not actually following your policies because this is what it says, but here's what you're doing." I mean, that was a big SolarWinds
Yeah.
charge against the company and the CISO in his individual capacity. Although all the SEC
Mm-hmm.
charges were dropped eventually against the company and individual. So, yeah, that's where it's theater, and it's hard to create a system that is continuously monitored, updated, but I think it's worth it. And once you get it right, it kind of runs on its own and doesn't require as much update.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. The policy area, and I always like to, when in these having these types of conversations myself, I always like to say, all right, what purpose does it serve? Like if it's just, let's give the GRC, and I'm GRC till I die. If it's just give the GRC person a chance to write a dissertation, then
Right.
what are we doing? Nail it to the front door. But what
Yeah.
purpose, and specifically, like how is it actionable, right? Like we've talked before on this series about the difference between saying we are responsible, we have transparency. It's only it only carries the weight of the paper it's printed on, to be able to have something that's actionable for sure.
Yep.
Next question: what AI discovery or scanning tools do you rate or like? Is there anything that you found that, I don't know, maybe want to give a shout out to, or something that you feel like has been a good tool?
So Stackware actually does have an announcement brewing for a partnership that we are going to, or we have entered into. I can't share it just yet, but It's a relatively well-known name in the discovery space, so we're going to be publishing that soon. And
Nice.
then I think the discovery side of things is an interesting landscape because there are multiple different schools of thought. There are those that, say, well, you have to look at the email addresses to see like what people are signing up for to
Mm,
understand like the full landscape. And then there are others who say, well, I don't want to give read access to my email to a third party vendor,
sure.
blah blah blah. We need some sort of inline, maybe CASB or something like that that can detect the traffic. And then there are others that are focused on the browser side of things, having a plugin. There are plugins that actually like govern other plugins in the
Hmm.
browser. And then even others who say, well, we're not going to trust any commercial or kind of commercially available or freely available browser. We're just going to have an enterprise browser. So those are all different approaches to the visibility, the discovery side of things. And I think it remains to be seen what the best approach is. I think one approach might be the right for certain types of organizations, and combining them could make sense in various cases. At the end of the day, having a way to track all of the systems that you have identified is also key. And that's something that StackAware does. And we hook into our customers' GRC tools, we hook into their cloud environments, and we can pull down that data and understand everything that's in use. And coming up with a holistic picture in a single source of truth is ultimately what you want to do, and you can use several different ways to get there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's different. It does once again come back to kind of the fit, right? The fit for that specific organization. But for the person that specifically asked this question, I would say keep an eye out for the for announcement type of
Mhm.
posts, and
Yep,
and that'll clue you into at least what tools Walter here rates or likes. Um,
exactly.
Probably not going to enter into agreement if you didn't actually believe in it. So,
Exactly.
speaking of rating things, I'll just call this kind of tail end of the series or pod here. Leave a review, right? Like a Google review. I'll just throw out a couple things. Some of them framework, some of them some legislation, topics more so. And you kind of give me a review. You can use a 1 to 5 star or just go into kind of what you think of it. The first one, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Colorado's new-ish AI Act, SB 24205, becoming SB 26189. Review on that.
2 stars on it. Basically, they took something that was incredibly complex and confusing and no one agreed on, and then they wrote it into something that was slightly less oppressive in terms of the regulatory requirements, but potentially even more confusing to me. And now we're in a situation where, you could get asked the question, do you use an ADMT, automated decision making technology? And then to which I have to say, okay, are we talking California or Colorado? And then if you
Mm,
say Colorado, then I'd say, oh, is it a covered ADMT or is it just
mm,
an ADMT?
yeah.
So, we're kind of getting into this. It's almost a little crazy, how many terms there are and what the requirements are for companies to do to be compliant when they're running AI. And then, you also get into these situations like specifically 189. It says, an ADMT is this, but it's not all these other things. But as
Mm,
long as they're not, performing these actions. And I'm always very critical of a definition where you say, it is this, but it's not this, because then it creates this middle category. It's like, well,
yeah.
you didn't say it's this, but you didn't say
Right.
it's not this. So like, what about you create
You have to
gray area when
full
you do that?
list. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Either you enumerate everything that is, or
Yeah.
you enumerate everything that isn't. You don't do both, because
Right.
then you create gray area. And 189 has kind of done this.
Hmm.
And also, like, frankly, the relief is not that huge huge from a compliance perspective. I think it is from like a penalty perspective, because the whole concept of algorithmic discrimination has been removed from the new
Mhm.
statute, and there are a lot of carve outs for certain things. But I mean, yeah, I'm not really picking up what they're putting down out there in
Sure.
Colorado. Like, and again, I worked with customers who prepared for SB 205 in a very diligent and, well-intentioned manner, and they kind of got slapped in the face. Like, they
Mhm.
did all this work, they built these systems around this law that they anticipated coming into force, and then at the last second, it gets changed. It gets
Yeah.
changed. So 2 stars trending
That's
toward 1.
trending
We'll see
towards
how it
one.
goes.
Okay. All right. I don't know why, but it just reminded me. I had my little brother was in town, and he was looking for a place. I said, "Where do you want to go out to eat?" And he was looking for a place, and and someone that just made me think of it. Somebody in the comments, like the lead comment, just said "run," and that killed me when he showed me that for a local spot here for me. But when you said 2 stars trending towards 1, I was like, "Oh, we're getting close to the run character." The next one,
Well,
NSPM.
people are running.
Yeah, right.
Palantir left Colorado,
That's
and
a
they
good point.
specifically cited SB 205 as a reason, as a risk to them.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's a very
it's
good
not
point.
it's not hypothetical. Although I guess SB 205 probably still does apply, even if they're based in Florida, which I
Sure,
think they are
sure.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, the next one. Speaking of some legislation or the such, NSPM 11, which is the artificial intelligence in the national security enterprise.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense. I'd probably give it a 4 or 5 stars. It basically just says, hey, come up with a set of guidelines, policies, procedures, methods for implementing AI throughout the national security establishment. And, I think it's pretty straightforward in my mind. I don't think it's anything groundbreaking. I would say maybe a little late. Maybe
Sure.
maybe could have done this a couple of years ago. Certainly at the early part of the current administration or before. But yeah, I mean, definitely makes sense what they're doing here to use AI in the national security enterprise. And I won't dive into geopolitics, but maybe we can
Mhm.
save that for another conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you kind of in line with that a little bit. The EO or the executive order 14409 or
Yeah, I think
1409.
that was also happened around the same time. Executive Order 14409 came out in June 2026, and what it did was create a voluntary safety and security regime for frontier models. And interestingly enough, it was very specific in that nothing in it creates a government licensing, pre-clearance, or permitting requirement for new AI systems. So it's purely voluntary. And this was in response to some, I guess, public debate, some confusion, you might say, within the administration about how they were going to regulate artificial intelligence from a security safety perspective at all. And yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable. The non-mandatory side of things, I think, makes it less impactful from both a positive and negative perspective. And I think it's good to have this capability. And the key thing that you want to avoid is one where there's a, hey, the government signed off on it, YOLO, or on the other hand, the government won't sign off on it, so we're not going to release anything. Then it becomes a de facto pre-clearance
Yeah.
approval process, which would require congressional require a statute being passed, and you don't want that kind of de facto blocker being created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. The I was going to say, speaking of voluntary, I've got a friend who gets so mad when I call anything from NIST voluntary because he works with the state or adjacent to the State Department and or one of these state governments, And so he's like, it's not voluntary for everyone. I'm like, I get it.
Mm.
But, NIST AI risk management framework, as far as a rate for that.
The NIST AI risk management framework is a voluntary for most people framework, but it is not voluntary for those in the federal government. It's mandatory for all federal civilian agencies and some state governments that have those requirements there. I think it is a useful way to discuss AI risk. I think it gives you some things to think about. For example, looking at external review, whether you want to have stakeholders who might be impacted by the system involved in the discussion, similar to an AI impact assessment under ISO 42001. I think there are a lot of gaps in it though. So first of all, it kind of has a random out of place section in my mind that has like the OECD AI principles in the middle of it. And I'm like, why are you just repackaging some other standard inside your standard? So I didn't think that made any sense. Also, there's a lot of like mealy mouthed wording in there about, it should be a priority. This is something to consider. And, I think there's a lot of vague wording in there. I actually did a very detailed analysis of the whole NIST AI RMF on the StackAware blog. So if you go to blog.stackaware.com and look up NIST AI RMF, you'll be able to see the entire breakdown there. I think it's a useful tool to consider, but it has some gaps. I would say three stars.
Okay. And then I'll just close with this one, which is AI literacy training and or adaptation. So just from your vantage point, how people are being educated about it, trained on it, adapting to use of it.
I'll say that I'll give it an example here. So I remember at one point when I worked at a previous job when I was an employee, I was telling someone, I was saying, hey, can you do this XYZ in Jira, which is a project management tool? And the person says, oh, well, I never got any training in Jira. And I said, okay, I've gotten 0 seconds of Jira training in my life, but nonetheless, you could go to the help center. You can go to, that was back before ChatGPT, where you actually had to like read documentation,
Sure.
maybe Control F, maybe you could Control F it. Yeah. Maybe you could find a Reddit post or like a Stack Overflow post where someone had hit the exact same issue, and you would have to go there. I would say that that's not to say training isn't useful. It certainly is, and especially for advanced systems, it makes sense to have appropriate training there. I will say though that as we hurdle into the later part of the 2020s, relying on someone to train you to do something is going to be a dangerous thing from a career perspective, because there are people out there who are constantly, we talked about inferencing versus training. Like there are people out there who are constantly inferencing and training themselves on new technologies, new procedures on their own. They're just out there learning. Maybe they're talking to ChatGPT or whatever, or Claude and asking it how to do things. Or they're going out, they're reading things, they're trying out new tools, they're playing around with APIs, no code tools. That's on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum are the people who have been trained on a job and then they're just doing that job until they get trained on something else. And 50 years ago, that might have been an acceptable way to participate in the economy, but it's not going to be in the future. And people may not like that, or they may think I'm being uncaring or cold, but that's just a fact. So if you are relying on someone else to improve your AI literacy or to ensure you are AI literate, you are making a professional mistake. So 3 stars, because it can go either way.
For sure. And that's a good thing to bring up. I was going to say, in addition to it, because the best way to learn is, especially I think with AI, is by self-investing like that. Just be mindful of the people that might come past your door promising you something different. You know, like there are ways and perhaps programs of being able to learn some of like how to use AI, or training of how to use, how to build up a familiarity with it. But I don't know. Sometimes I get real gun shy about any sort of boot camps, or learn how to do this. Like my advice is always to learn by doing, and that'll be something very practical. And to be honest, like to your point, the world is changing that way. It's also because it's become so much easier to self teach, like to be able to learn this stuff from the comfort of your gloomy office at home. You know, like it's just become so much easier to be able to do that. It's so much more accessible than it once was as well. So so not necessarily all the downside of it changing, but the fact that there's a lot more available to us. So
Yeah, and I mean, like a good way to learn is if you want to pitch me on a project that can improve StackAware,
hmm,
then do it. Then do it.
yeah,
Like I want people to pitch me on things that will improve StackAware.
yeah,
And if it's a legit project, like we'll do it. If it's not, it's not. I mean, I've had,
yep,
anyone who ever asks me for a job or contracting or anything, I say like, pitch me on something that you think would improve my company, and
mm,
I'll pay you for it.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like if you can improve it, I don't care who you are. I don't care what your educational background, your professional background is. Like, I don't care. I just care, will you do something that benefits the company?
that benefits. Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, legitimate inquiries only. If you
Yes,
DM
legitimate
something that
inquiries.
definitely looks like it was created by AI and talks way too much about optimizing inefficiencies,
Sure.
might be some red flags. But
If it's
Walter,
vague, then that's not useful.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
large words but little content.
Yeah.
Um, at the risk of having large words and little content here, we'll wrap this up. And I appreciate greatly you joining today. Thank you, those of you that might be watching and or listening. Once again, this is the call out after every month episode like this of sending in your questions, sending in your comments, engage with us, and ask the questions that you feel like haven't been asked yet. So more than happy to dive into them, more than happy to discuss. And Walter, want to say thank you and appreciate you for hopping on here and having this discussion.
Cameron, always good to chat with you.
Perfect. Well, we'll see you all again next month for our